All right, let's tackle a beast of a book today, Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. I know what you are thinking. A book from over 200 years ago. We're in the digital age. Is this even relevant anymore? But honestly, so many of the things we stress about every day. Like, why does one pout? Why are some industries a goldmine while others are a grind? Should the government control prices? The fundamental logic behind all these questions. Smith broke it all down way back then. Let me give you a simple example. Think about your morning coffee, from the farmer who grew the beans to the roaster, the barista who brews it, and you paying with the tap of your phone. That entire process is built on concepts like the division of labor, the flow of currency, how prices are formed and again. That is all core content from The Wealth of Nations. You might not realize it, but Smith wasn't writing some dusty old textbook. He was essentially creating a user's guide to understanding the relationship between money and your life. And let's clear up a common misconception. This book isn't just for economists. Smith deliberately used everyday examples, like how a pin factory works, or why a baker and a butcher make different profits, because he wanted regular people to get it. The core question he wanted to answer was incredibly practical. How does a nation become wealthy, and how can ordinary people live better lives? More importantly, this book helps us dodge so many common sense traps. For instance, most of us think more money may more wealth. But Smith teaches us a crucial lesson. Wealth isn't about hoarding gold and silver. It is about the goods and services that actually meet our needs. Imagine a country sitting on a mountain of gold, but running out of food and clothing. Are they truly rich? Of course not. That same logic applies today. When you are looking at economic news or your own investments, don't just stare at the numbers. So, stick with me. We're going to follow Smith's thinking, starting with the big one. What even is wealth? From there, we'll decode the secrets of labor, money, and prices. Once you get these concepts, whether you are analyzing industry trends or just planning your own career, after all, understanding how wealth is created, distributed, and grown is, and always will be, the foundation of living a good life. Part 1. What exactly is wealth? To really get the wealth of nations, we first need to fix a core misunderstanding. What is wealth? If we get this wrong, everything else, labor, money, prices, just won't make sense. First, let's look at the popular opinion back in Smith's day. The reigning theory in Europe was mercantilism, which basically said more gold and silver equals a richer country. Nations were obsessed with stockpiling precious metals. They would mine for it, go to war for it, and even pass laws to stop gold from leaving the country. Spain, for example, hit the jackpot when they found massive silver mines in the Americas. The entire nation went on a silver hoarding frenzy. But Adam Smith looked at this and thought, this makes no sense. Can you eat gold? Can you wear silver? He used a very practical example. Imagine two countries. Country A has a vault filled with gold, but their harvests have failed for years. People are hungry. They don't have proper clothing, and they can't even get firewood to stay warm in the winter. Country B doesn't have much gold, but its fields are fertile, producing plenty of food. Its factories make warm clothes, and every family has a solid roof over their head. Which country is truly wealthier? It is obviously Country B. Yeah, because the things that actually make life good hard. It is the goods and services that meet our needs. Food, clothes, housing, a craftsman's skill, a doctor's care. That is real wealth. Smith states it clearly in the book. The wealth of a nation is the total sum of the goods and services produced by its people's labor each year. There are two key ideas in that sentence. Produced by labor, stuff doesn't just appear. People have to work to create it. Total sum. It is not about how much one person has, but about how much useful stuff the entire country can provide for everyone. A farmer growing wheat, a tailor making a coat, even a barber giving a haircut. These are all parts of a nation's wealth because they fulfill real human needs. So why was mercantilism wrong? Because it confused the tool of exchange with wealth itself. Gold and silver, money are just tools. It is like the digital number you see when you tap your phone to pay. That number isn't the wealth. The coffee and bagel you buy with it are. Think about it. If a country just prints a ton of money but doesn't produce more goods, what happens? The money becomes worthless. What used to cost $1 now costs $3. That is inflation. Smith saw this clearly. Money is just a medium for circulation. Not the wealth, so is... For example, if you have extra eggs and want a pair of shoes, finding someone with shoes who wants eggs is a pain. But if you can sell the eggs for money and then use that money to buy shoes, life gets much easier. The value of gold or money depends entirely on how many goods it can be exchanged for. If it can't buy anything, it is no different than a shiny rock. This brings us to a crucial distinction Smith made: nominal wealth versus real wealth. Nominal wealth, how much money you have in your hand. Real wealth, how much stuff you can actually buy with that money. For example, $100 20 years ago could buy you a full cart of groceries. The nominal amount is the same, but your real wealth has decreased. This is why Smith constantly argued, stop focusing on the amount of money and start focusing on how much your nation's labor can actually produce. In modern terms, when we measure a country's economic strength, we don't look at its gold reserves, we look at its GDP, gross domestic product. And what is GDP? It is essentially the total value of all goods and services produced. The economic growth of countries in recent decades wasn't built on hoarding gold, but on farmers growing more food, factories building more cars and appliances, and the service industry providing better healthcare and education. This is the growth of real wealth that Smith was talking about. And this brings us to regain. If wealth is the total amount of goods produced by labor, then how do you get labor to produce more goods? The answer, which Smith dives into right at the start of his book, is the key: the division of labor. It is like this: one person trying to do everything is inefficient. But if you break a task down and have this is the engine of wealth creation. Next time, we'll talk about exactly how the division of labor makes everyone richer. Part 2. The division of labor, FINTI, the accelerator for wealth. Okay, so we've established that real wealth is the total amount of stuff a nation's labor can produce. The next logical question is, how do we get more stuff? Right at the beginning of The Wealth of Nations in fact, he claims it is the single most important reason for economic growth. And he is not wrong. This principle is still at the heart of our economy today. Let's start with Smith's most famous example, the pin factory. He observed that an untrained worker trying to make a pin from start to finish, drawing the wire, straightening it, cutting it, sharpening the point, attaching the head, and polishing it, would be lucky to make even 20p. But what happens if you divide that process into 18 distinct steps and assign each step to a different worker? One person just draws the wire, another just straightens it, a third just sharpens the point. The result: that same group of workers could now produce 48,000 pins a day. That is an average of 4,800 pins per person, a 240-fold increase in production. This wasn't just the division of labor acts like a supercharger for productivity. See, why is it so effective? Smith breaks it down into 3 key reasons, and you can see them all around you in your daily life. First, workers get really good at their one specific task. We have a saying for this: practice makes perfect. When you do the same thing over again, think about a professional chef in a busy restaurant. The person whose only job is to chop vegetables can do it with incredible speed and uniformity, way faster than a chef who has to chop, cook, and plate the food all by themselves. Smith noted that this repetition builds a kind of muscle memory, allowing workers to perform tasks quickly and flawlessly without even thinking about it. Second, it saves a ton of time. If one person has to do multiple jobs, they waste time switching between tasks, tools, and locations. Imagine you are both a farmer and a weaver. You'd have to stop farming, put away your tools, walk over to your loom, set it up, and only then start your weaving. But with the division of labor, one person stays in the field and another stays at the loom. No time is lost switching gears. Smith argued that this switching time is a much bigger deal than we think, and specialization eliminates it completely. Third, it sparks innovation. When a worker focuses on one small, repetitive task all day, they're more likely to think of clever ways to do it better or faster. Many simply a worker whose only job is to sharpen pinpoints might invent a small device to hold the wire steady. A factory worker tightening the same bolt all day might come up with a more ergonomic wrench. Smith believed that focusing the mind on a narrow problem makes it easier to find a solution. This creates a powerful cycle. Division of labor leads to innovation, which leads to even greater efficiency. Now let's zoom out and see how this impacts society as a whole. The incredible variety of products we enjoy today is a direct result of the division of labor. Take the t-shirt you are wearing. Cotton was grown by farmers, spun into thread at a mill, woven into fabric at another factory, cut and sewn at a garment factory, designed by a fashion designer, and shipped to a store by a logistics company. Hundreds of specialized steps, and if any one of them failed, that t-shirt wouldn't issue. Or think about your smartphone. The microchip was made by one company, the screen by another, the battery by a third, all assembled in a factory thousands of miles away. It is a global symphony of specialization. Smith couldn't have imagined a global supply chain. But he understood the core principle. The more you divide labor and the more people participate, the greater the total volume of goods you can produce, making the entire society wealthier. And here is another key point people often miss. The division of labor makes it easier for the average person to find a job. Building an entire car is incredibly complex, but just installing the wheels or tightening a specific set of bolts, that is a skill an ordinary person can learn quickly. This allows more people to edge, but this leads to a new problem. If everyone is only making one thing, you make shoes, I grow wheat. How do we get the things we don't make? We need to trade, but constantly trying to barter shoes for wheat is clumsy and inefficient. What if the wheat farmer doesn't need shoes, and the convenient middleman is what we'll talk about next? Money, Part 3, Money Sunday, the lubricant for exchange. Last time, we talked about how the division of labor is like an engine, allowing people to produce a massive amount of goods. You specialize in growing grain, I specialize in making tools, someone else weaves cloth. But one only produces, and money was born out of the frustrations of trying to make those exchanges work. First, let's go back to a time before money and see how messy bartering really was. Imagine you are a wheat farmer. You've had a great harvest and have extra wheat you want to trade for a new coat to survive the winter. First, you have to find a tailor who happens to have an extra coat. The real problem is, that tailor also has to want your wheat. If his family already has enough food and he needs a new hammer, your deal is dead in the water. You might have to take your wheat, find a blacksmith willing to trade it for a hammer, and then take that hammer back to the tailor for the coat. What if the blacksmith doesn't want wheat either? It is a logistical nightmare. Smith called this the double coincidence of wants. For a trade to happen, you have to find someone who has what you want, and who also wants what you have. It is incredibly inefficient and could never support the massive volume of trade created by the division of labor. Over time, people figured out a workaround. Early on, things like cattle or grain were used because they had universal value. But they were far from perfect. You can't exactly make change from a cow if you only want to trade for a loaf of bread, and grain can spoil. Eventually society gravitated towards metal, silver, and cobalt. Divisible. You can easily break them down into smaller units to pay for things of different values. Durable. They don't rust or rot. You can bury a gold coin for 100 years, and it'll still be a gold coin. Consistent value. Their supply is relatively stable. Unlike seashells, which you could just find on a beach. And just like that, metals became the dominant medium of exchange. But here is the crucial point Smith makes. Money is not wealth. It is a tool for exchanging wealth. Think of it like this. The balance in your banking app isn't the wealth itself. The groceries you can buy with it are. For ancient people, the silver coin wasn't the wealth. It was a bridge that allowed them to turn their own labor. Like the wheat they grew into the products of someone else's labor. Like the coat the tailor made. Smith used a great analogy. Money is like the wheels of a great wagon. It helps move goods from place to place. But the wheels themselves are not the cargo. A common mistake is to confuse money with wealth, to think that the more cash you have, the richer you are. But Smith warned against this. If a country prints tons of money, but the amount of goods stays the same, the only result is inflation. The $1 loaf of bread now costs if it can't be exchanged for goods. A pile of cash is just a pile of useless paper or metal. Now, let's see how money turbocharges the division of labor. With money, specialization can finally flourish. The farmer can focus on growing as much wheat as possible, knowing he can sell it for silver. The tailor can focus on making the best coats, knowing the silver he earns. Money acts like a lubricant, allowing the massive amount of goods created by specialization to flow smoothly through the economy. It lets everyone trade their specialized labor for a dazzling variety of goods and services. Without money, Smith argued, the division of labor could never have reached its full potential. But this raises a new question. Once you have money, how do you decide what something is worth? Why does a couch cost 10 so? What are the hidden rules that determine the price of everything? That is the secret code of prices, and it is what we'll crack open in the next part. Understanding how prices are set is key to understanding the true relationship between money and the things we buy.